is that in some point in our careers, we either search for a job, recruit for a job, done research for a job, have applied for something, and maybe went through the whole thing and didn't get it, or maybe we went through the whole thing and did get it and whatnot. So we wanted to put together a panel. We wanted to put together a call to address the different questions that people have when they go through the interview process from beginning to end. So with that, I am going to pass it off to John. She's going to introduce herself, and then we'll move on from there.
Hello, thank you, Yasmin. Hi, everyone. My name is Sahar. I am a Bay Area native, so thank you all for having me on this call. I'm really excited to be here with you. As I mentioned, I grew up in the Bay Area, born and raised, went out to school at UCI, then hopped over to France for a couple of years where I did my master's in HR, and now I'm back in the Bay Area working with tech at Salesforce.
Thank you, Thad. So like I mentioned before, this call is centered around job search and recruiting and whatnot. And Thad has lots of experience in this. So the fun fact, when we actually put out an email to get the seeking community if they had any recommendations or referrals for someone to do a call like this, and we had multiple people recommend that, so we automatically knew she was a rock star for this. So we are very excited to have her on the panel. So the first question I have for you, Thad, before we go into the nitty-gritty of applying and interviewing, resumes and whatnot, how did you get involved in recruiting, and what are you doing now?
Yeah, thank you. Well, like I said, it's a pleasure to be here and actually an honor to be invited, so thank you. I randomly fell into HR. Actually was not part of the plan. I grew up thinking I was going to be a doctor and ended up wanting to be a psychologist, and I studied cognitive psychology early on at UCI. And then I realized, okay, maybe I don't want to go into therapy. That's not the route I wanted to go into. And I said, okay, how can I apply the behavioral skills that I'm learning from psychology to the day-to-day life in a business environment? So like I said, I kind of fell into HR. HR matched those skills really well. And I started my first stunt in recruiting. And I actually started it off in university recruiting for L'Oreal. And I actually helped build out a university program where we attracted students from all around the globe to come and do internships at the company. That's where I started. And then I joined Salesforce about 7.5 years ago now, where I started in our core recruiting function, helping hire sales folks, and then moved on to our executive search team where we were hiring C-level executives into the company. And then I did a few things in onboarding, and then I went to the actual business to learn a little bit more about the product scales and how the company operates. And then I came back, and right now I'm an HR business partner, which we call employee success at Salesforce, and I help support 4 different functions in the company. That includes HR, which is really funny. I'm chair for HR. Our equality team, so think diversity and inclusion. I also support our corporate relations and our global communication. So one of my biggest partners actually in my day-to-day is recruiting now as well.
That's awesome. I mean, you clearly have so much experience. It seems like a full circle experience.
Yeah.
Going from starting in recruiting and now being like the HR bank business partner for it. That's pretty awesome. Yeah. So just to give the audience some context, the way we've laid out the questions for today is centered basically through a potential interview process. So people first being interested in there's something out there, or maybe I'm interested in finding something, ending towards going all the way down towards like the actual interview itself. So we'll go through those series. Hopefully we can tackle everything. We're going to try our best. We have a lot of questions that we've written down, but if not, we will try to answer them after the call and send them to you guys as well. So the first question I have is, let's say I'm a professional, I'm in my job, and I'm like, I think I want to find something else. I think I'm interested in a new role, and I want to see what else is out there. what would be the first steps that you would recommend someone to take to put their toes in the water and see what exists out there?
Mm-hmm. So I think first is really kind of identifying what route you want to go into. So whether it be sales, whether it be technology, engineering, whatever it might be, like I think that's number one. And also really thinking about, do your skill set match that new job you're going to go into? And then I think the other step, and I think first and foremost, I think it's always starting with your network, and really thinking about who can you pick their brain on these various different roles that you have. Because a lot of the time people are like, oh, I think I want to be an engineer. And then they go through the process and they're like, actually, this is not what I want to do. So as much as you can expand your network in those areas that you're thinking of applying to, the better you are suited into even understanding what the job is that you're going to apply for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think so too. I feel like there's also certain situations, like when you talked about like identifying what are the skill sets that are necessary for that job, or let's say you're trying to move a step up, like what would that look like? Like sometimes just identifying, okay, like in order for me to go into this position, I need to have X skill, and then figuring that out and then putting work towards that.
Right.
And then make yourself a viable candidate when you do apply. And that could take a month, that could take 3 months, that could take 6 months, it could take longer or whatnot.
Yeah.
But I feel like the initial, even just figuring out and like asking those initial questions, it results in something potentially like a longer journey than you might think, but it'll better prepare you.
Absolutely. It's about creating the plan, right? Yeah. And I think part of that discovery allows you to build a plan. And to your point, whether that plan takes you 3 months or a year, at least you know what you're striving towards. And again, going back to that networking piece, like the more you talk to people, the more you'll also understand what are those niche skill sets that are good for you to have. And then you can incorporate that into your plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. We have some people that will come in, like people who work in the company, like their friends or people in the network will come in and just be like, hey, I'm just interested to see how X works or whatnot, just kind of get a feel of things. No, it's so true. I feel like when you're like first like a new grad, it's like, I'm going to do X.
Right. And by all means, I'm the prime example of how much that switches. And it's true. It's like, I think a lot of these companies, you know, I would speak for Salesforce as its own, like we have many people that come through the door to just kind of get a feel of the experience of being in the office, right? Like even that in itself, if you have that network, rely on that, because I guarantee people aren't going to say no to allow you to shadow for like an hour.
Oh yeah.
Right?
No, it's true. I feel like people love it.
Yeah.
they enjoy
it's
it.
Fun. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's also a good point in seeing the environment you would potentially work in, or an environment similar to another company that you think is would be similar to it. So like if you want to work at a startup that has 10 people, you know, is that something, would you like that versus working in a company maybe that is like a Salesforce or a Google that is very, very big, or a job where people are remote half of the time, so the office is going to be empty.
It's a ghost town.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want a community-driven company, or like do you like to work on your own independently? Like those are big things to think about too when you're looking for a new job or a new company, for that matter. Yeah. What's the culture? I mean, for me in particular, like researching the culture is super important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think so too. We have questions and a few that we're going to talk about in a little bit that talks about like how to do research, but I agree 100%. Like it makes such a difference. So the next question is centered around resumes. So like the questions I have outlined here, we don't have to go through. We can so much talk about resumes, but like we have people say it needs to be under a page. Is that still true? How do you show your value in a resume? What's the difference between a good resume, a great resume? What are recruiters looking for? And then LinkedIn. How important is LinkedIn in today's world?
Yeah, so I'm going to start bottom up. So LinkedIn is super important. I think believe it or not, your social brand is important, especially with these new age companies, because we have information readily available. You just have to Google search someone and there you go. So your LinkedIn, even more than your resume, I feel like your LinkedIn is important. So as much as you can keep your LinkedIn up to date and fulfilling, I think it's really good. I think in terms of the buzzwords, just the resume as a whole and how you build it, I think it's really important to tailor your resume based on the job that you're applying to. Yeah. So you might have one resume that's a jack for all trades, but if you're applying to a unique job, try to embellish the skills that you have that are uniquely aligned to that job, because those are the words that recruiters are going to pick up on that are going to actually matter. In terms of how long it should be, definitely a page. Do not go more than that. You would not have time. Because like I said, even more than the resume, they're going to just click a button and go to your LinkedIn profile. They're going to look at your network. They're going to look at your past jobs there. They're going to look at your references right there. So I think it's really important to make sure that's robust. There's also something here around a cover letter. Cover letters are outdated. Like, don't waste your time. Don't doing them. But short, sweet, and making sure that it's tailored to the job that you're looking for.
No, I agree. I was telling a story to the rest of the AAWC board how I was hiring for a position last year, and we were like setting up the interview structure and whatnot, and like the process and what documents we would ask from candidates. And they were like, would you want a cover letter? Like, would you want them to submit a cover letter? I was like, I don't have time to read a cover letter. Because it's hiring managers, but they're not, like, their only responsibility is not just hiring for this role.
Yeah.
Other things in their day-to-day.
Yeah.
And especially given given the fact that there's also LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I feel like it makes up for the fact for like not having a cover letter.
Yeah, and you have to remember that recruiters are the ones that are screening these resumes, these applications, and they're taking their most qualified candidates to the hiring manager, right? So as much as you can spin your your resume to qualifications, like the better you are to being that leading candidate, because again, it's we always hire for the most qualified person in the role. So as long as you can build up your qualifications on your resume, that's great.
You mentioned about tailoring your resume to the specific roles that you're applying for, making sure they have the correct buzzword. What would be your tips on how can people identify or figure out what are the right buzzwords to have for the different roles that you're applying for?
I would say really look at the job description, right? Study it. Look at the words that are used in it. Think about those requirements that they're looking for. I would also even recommend, we have the information at our fingertips, right? Go on Glassdoor, go on LinkedIn, research people who are in these jobs, look at those skill sets and try to really tailor it to that.
No, I completely agree. And then the other point about showing your value on your resume and including the buzzwords that the recruiter is looking for. This one recommendation that I've been given in the past, and I would love to get your thoughts on it, is quantifying your value in your previous roles. So for example, if you're like, I helped do X, the feedback I've gotten is like, well, what was the impact? Like, what happened? Like, did you increase X by 130% year over year? Like, what was it? What are your thoughts about that?
Exactly. I think as much as you can show your impact on a resume, like, for example, you're giving one example that comes to me. It's like people who are going for sales jobs, right? Like what recruiters want to see is, okay, how much more did you attain your quota? Like, it's not about, I hit my quota. It's, I hit my quota at 120% year over year. I generated this amount of revenue into the company, X, Y, and Z. And even for projects, it's talking about, if I think about, okay, at Salesforce, I built out our executive onboarding program. Well, the impact with that was I onboarded 42 executives into the company. So really driving, like, it's one thing to build and support and all of that, but it's to your point, what is the impact? What was the delivery behind that? And what happened after you did that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think so too. There's, I'm sure people send you resumes all the time to review, but sometimes when I get resumes to review, it's it's a lot of like descriptions, like very, very long, like.
Yeah, keep it short and simple, like, to the point.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Let's see. So the next question, so we'll go ahead and move on, is what advice would you give prepping for an interview? And we talked about this a little bit earlier. Like, what type of research should people be doing? Like, what kind of research? What should they be researching? Sometimes I'm in interview panels, I get so so shocked about sometimes like candidates just don't know the basic information of like the company that
like, did you even like, are you
I'm like, okay, I'm surprised you got this far, but how should someone prep for an interview? And specifically when it comes to doing research for that particular role, what should they be researching?
I mean, you should. I laugh because I get this a lot. Where, I mean, even starting with the basics, right? When you're talking to a recruiter, like even just for a screening, like you should know the company you're applying to.
Yeah.
So research it. Know the job that you're applying to.
Yeah.
For that matter, because I mean, I've had my fair share of people who have I've spoke to when I was in the recruiting world, where it's like, do you even know what job you're applying to? Like, and I'm not sure you know, because I think you actually belong in this job, not this. So, you know, really researching the company.
Yeah.
Knowing the company's values. I think, you know, I feel like the industry is moving to a values-based industry. And knowing the values of a company is super important. And more importantly, I think figuring out how you relate to those values.
Yeah.
And being able to tell that story, because the more relatable you can be in an interview, the more receiving you are. So really thinking about, again, research the role. You can research it in so many avenues. I mentioned LinkedIn, Glassdoor, like the website itself, like kind of get a sense. Even look at if there's YouTube channels on these various companies. Have they spoken at conferences? What are they speaking about? Understand, like, I know from a Salesforce perspective, like understanding our products is important. And it doesn't matter what job you're in. Like, even if you're working at the front desk, like they want you to know what our product suite is, right? So really making sure you know, make sure you know who the CEO of the company is. Like, those are important, the leaders, and really being prepared for that. I think thinking about, you know, even just if you look on Twitter and thinking about what kind of praise or negativity does the company get, right? And really making sure you have that full rounded picture of the company and the role is really important.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And there's so many channels you can get that information.
Yeah,
like you mentioned, whether it's social media, so whether it's going on Twitter, go checking out their Instagram, their
own website,
their own website, everywhere. And I know we for Course Heroes website, like we have our values like identified, and it's something that we're very much a mission driven company. So we definitely look for an alignment there, and it is interesting sometimes when you notice that the people come into the interviews and maybe are not 100% aware of that, and it's like, I'm pretty sure it's like all over the website, but it's funny. But I also know that when I'm doing the interview, when I am the interviewer, that it's also nice when the candidate has done research about me. I feel like that helps out too.
Absolutely. Like, if you get a list of the folks that you're meeting with, look them up, get a sense of who they are. What are even their hobbies, right? Like, going back to the relatable piece, like that's so important. So it's not just this question and answer interview. I think the best interviews are the ones that become a dialogue.
Yeah.
Not like, okay, next question. Okay, next, because it's just awkward silence. But like when it just flows naturally, those are the interviews you want. And even like, I want to take it even a step back. Like because I talked about networking earlier on, when you're even networking, you want to approach the people you're trying to network with the sense of education on what the company is, what role you're looking for. Like one of my biggest pet peeves are when people send me their resume and they're like, hi, can you help me find a job? And it's like, no, I can't. Like,
yeah,
great, I see your resume, but like, you tell me what job you want and then I can, like we can go from there. So I think really making sure that you come off understanding and knowing, even at that get-go, is super important.
What are your thoughts about sending a follow-up email after the interview?
Always.
Yeah.
Always. I know it's old school, it's old-fashioned, but I actually, when people do not send me a follow-up email, I question. I'm like, wait, why? Okay. And honestly, I'm going to be really honest. Like if I have two equally qualified candidates, and there's one person who sent me the thank you, one person who didn't, I will always go for the person who's thanked.
Yeah.
I think it's proper. It's the right way to do it.
And it's also leaning towards the safe side. You never know. It will never hurt.
Never hurt. Because here's the other thing. Like maybe you're the second candidate up and you did that follow through and another role comes up and they're like, oh wait, we actually have a pipeline already. Let's just go back to that candidate. So really keeping that dialogue is important.
I think so too. And then going back to the research part and knowing the company that you're applying to, the other thing that I thought about, and I think I put it in the questions, was attire, like how to dress for an interview and doing your research beforehand. Because I know there are certain companies that are more casual and are totally fine if you come into the interview more casual. And I know the status quo is like you always want to come in and like, your best put together professional outfit, but that might not be the case for the company that you're applying to.
Right. I feel like, you should know the type of company you're walking into. And even if it's a company that's super casual, like a startup, for example, I will say don't go in with your jeans. Like make it super business casual at that point. But no, like, right, like I think banking industries, like they're very button up, wear a suit. Tech, you can get away with business casual, right? You probably don't want to come with a suit and tie, for example, for the men, and for a woman, like a total button-up suit. But just know the industry that you're walking into.
I agree. And I also
come in sneakers.
Oh, yeah. And I also think it's totally fine if you don't know to ask and clarify.
Yes. Ask your recruiter and get a sense from your recruiter and say, hey, what's the attire at the company? Recruiters love answering those questions and they'll be able to provide you that.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I think if there are any gray areas or if you have questions about anything, just ask your recruiter. That's what they're there for, to help you answer all these questions for you.
Yeah. I think of the recruiter as a bit of a quarterback in the whole process because they're the ones who are helping you, but they're also helping the hiring manager. Because you also have to remember a recruiter's goal is to land the job, right? They want to make sure that they're bringing the best people forward. So they're going to do everything they can to make sure you're successful.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think also for whenever we have candidates come in and I do an interview, like I want the candidate to do well.
Yeah.
Like I never go in like hoping the candidate fails or
of course not, because again, you want them to land the job.
Yeah.
And recruiters take a lot of pride on bringing forward strong candidates because that therefore impacts like retention, who can stay on, like what does that look like? So it's super important.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And then in terms of prepping, there's different types of interviews. So there could be a phone interview, there could be some type of video call interview, like a Zoom interview like this. you could have an in-person interview, what would be your tips on how to prepare for interviews that are in different environments or done through different channels?
Mm-hmm. So always be on time, regardless of the interview. Always be on time. If you're doing phone interviews are tricky. Like, to be honest, I don't like phone interviews because I like to see people's reactions to things, because it allows me to kind of follow through and get a sense of like where is this interview going. But be on time. If you're doing a phone, make sure you're in an area where you have service. Like, do not like be there early, be prepared, have service, have your headphones, put your speaker on. The worst thing is when it's like, wait, I can't hear you. Sorry, can't hear you. Because you just don't want that. Same thing with the video call. Make sure your camera's working. Make sure your speakers are working. Practice with someone before if you're unsure. Make sure your internet connection's on. Reset that internet before you go. Not during the call. And then for the in-person, again, you want to show up on time. I do think it's really good when you show up a little bit early, check in wherever whatever system they might have. It's always good to be a little before time, not even on time. You want to get there a little bit beforehand, and come prepared. So if you are coming to an in-person interview, bring your resume. Again, that might sound old school, but bring it. A lot of people are like scrambling to find your resume on their phone or their laptop or what that might look like, but just bring it with you. And same with the video call or in person. Maybe even just 5 minutes before the call, shoot that person an email. Say, here's my resume for a call. I think just think of those etiquettes that will help you show that you're prepared for what you're walking into.
Yeah, I agree so much. And for our interviews, we always provide resumes, but you never know. One day the printer might not be working, or someone takes 2 copies instead of 1, so the next person comes in and there's no copies to the resume left on the table, whatever it might be. So having that resume prepared. And then I even had one person who she came in and she had a portfolio of like these designs that she's created, and she was like, I just wanted to show you the work that I've done, and I don't know if you had seen it before, but here you go. And she had already put everything together in a binder, and she had it there, and it was like, that was really thoughtful. Like, I didn't necessarily need to see it, but like it was like very thoughtful for her to like put together a plan and to share like during the parts of the interview where it seemed like it might potentially be relevant.
Right.
So I feel like I think the common theme here is that you can never like over prepare.
Right. Exactly. You can never over prepare.
Yeah. So we have a question.
I will say one thing. One thing
go ahead.
to be tricky about, and it might be controversial, but like try to be, and again, it goes back to the attire. Like for us women, like make sure you're not overload on perfume. I know this is like, it's totally tactical thing, but just be mindful of that, because you might walk into an interview and someone's allergic. And it's like really hard for them to even focus on you because they're focusing on your perfume, for example. So just be mindful of little things like that too.
No, I think that's really good tip or advice. That's like one of those pieces of advice that you maybe would never cross someone's mind.
Right.
It's just so simple. It's like you have
like, let me quickly spray before I walk in.
Yeah, it's like, no, maybe you didn't have to.
30 minutes before.
Yeah. No, I agree, because the last thing you want is for the hiring team to get together and review how your interview went, and they're like, it was okay, but I couldn't focus because
exactly.
And it's like, and that small stuff can make an impact.
Right.
I think you want. The way I've kind of seen it so far, it's like you want to limit the amount of distractions that could take away from someone being able to assess your interview.
Exactly.
Themselves. But okay, so I was going to say, we have a question from Facebook, and so we can answer it. We could potentially answer it later, but I wanted to mention it right now. Just get your thoughts. So the question is, how much? It's a great question. How much does confidence factor into an interview? Does attitude make a difference for a job you may not be qualified for or not certified yet?
very good question. I think it's important. You want to come in strong, right? I mean, you obviously don't want to come in and bluff your whole interview and act like you know it all, and then you get the job and it's day one and you're like, I actually don't know. But even being able to come in confident that you can learn and jump into the job and be able to prepare yourself in advance of even entering the job. And when you come in, like, you're a go-getter, you come in, you can learn quickly. And I think coming in with that confidence is important. But don't the overconfidence to the point where you're like, again, bluffing, like, you don't want to do that.
No, I think so too. And I think a lot of times, potentially, like, if it's a hiring manager or other people, if there is a position that you're applying for and you're like clearly don't have any of the skills necessary for it, but you're super confident, like, they can tell, you know. But I think what I've noticed is and you mentioned it, it's that confidence. And I may not have the skill now, but I'm confident in my ability to do what is necessary to get there.
Exactly.
You know? And so it's like confidence, but also a sense of humility. And that you are acknowledging.
It humanizes you, right? I think being able to humanize, and again, it goes back to even being able to relate, right? Like, that person might have been in your shoes, you know, many years ago, and being able to say, oh, I remember I came in with that confidence and that hunger to learn. And look where they are now. So I think, And then the point you made earlier of, let's say this person maybe doesn't get this job, but another position opens up, and you're like, hey, maybe they weren't fit for this one, but they might be a perfect fit for this one over here. Exactly.
So you never know. Great. So next questions we have is, so these are the tricky questions that we were talking about earlier. So I was telling Zad that they're usually, whenever people mention like the two most difficult questions that they have answering, is one, tell me about yourself. It's not necessarily a question, but it's more of like
such an awkward question.
And then the other one is, what's your biggest weakness? So what are your thoughts on how to answer both of those questions?
So when it comes to tell me about yourself, again, going back to the values of the company and then researching the person that's interviewing you, figure out a way to be able to say something about yourself that might be relatable to either the values of the company or the person that you're speaking to. I think another component, the third component around that, is also like, what's unique about you? Like, I think, you know, we're speaking as like with Afghan women right now, it's around, we are Afghan women. And I think that is something you should always articulate and be able to bring to the table, because it's unique. It's a differentiator. It's amazing. So being able to say, hey, I'm an Afghan woman. This is where I come from. This is my upbringing. I think that in itself is a huge thing to be able to bring to any interview.
Awesome.
Weaknesses. So this is a good question. I think it's really important to be able to share a weakness, because what you were talking about earlier about some humility, you can't come off being like, I'm the best, I'm the best, I'm the best. I think when you talk about your weakness, also talk about how you either have overcome that weakness or you're working to overcome that weakness. Because again, that shows some strength to, one, talk about your weakness, and then two, the strength of you overcoming it, or the fact that you're working towards overcoming it. So I think it is being able to, you should always be a little bit vulnerable in an interview.
Yeah, I think so too. I almost feel like what's your biggest weakness or whatnot is almost, it's like a way to assess, do you have a growth mindset?
Yes.
How do you tackle talent? Like, how do you grow from things?
Yes.
I think the idea isn't here that people are expecting you to be perfect.
Right.
We all can mention like multiple weaknesses or challenges that we each have. And I think what they're trying to assess is, how do you improve yourself? How do you do better?
Yeah.
I think there's like sometimes when I'll do an interview, it's like, what's your biggest weakness? And it's like, my biggest weakness is X. And it's like,
And there's no follow through.
There's no follow up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the other question that comes up, which is also a tricky question, is like, tell me a time you overcame a challenge, right? Or tell me a time you failed, right?
Yeah.
And like, some people just get like, wait, but no, I don't have any challenges, or I haven't failed. And it's almost weird when you hear that they haven't, because you're like, okay, now I know you're not being authentic. Right. So I think it also comes back to being authentic and saying, yeah, you know, I did. There was a time where I faced a challenge with my boss and this is how I overcame it. Or yeah, there was a time where I missed a deadline, but like, this is what I did. So really making sure you're being able to bring that to the conversation is important.
I think so too. There's one interview that I did. It was a phone interview, and the question was around like a challenge, or I think it was like something challenging situation you have to overcome. And she was like it was like a phone call. So she's like thinking about it. She was like, I don't think I faced any challenges. And I was like,
you're like, really? You can't even think. I'm like, this morning waking up was a challenge.
Yeah.
But I overcame it.
I was like, okay. And I think that it is a form of just being introspective.
Yeah.
You know, it's like your challenges don't make you weak. The fact that you went through something that wasn't easy doesn't mean that you are therefore incapable of accomplishing.
Right. I mean, you're human is really what it is. It's like, you are human. Yeah.
No, I agree. And going back to the first one, so tell me about yourself. This is personally my like least favorite question of all time. How, like, I think some people are just like, okay, well, tell me about myself. Like, where do I start? You know, and I think, like you mentioned, it depends on the position you're applying to. So that answer is going to be different. But if you had to give someone advice of like, okay, this is where you start and this is how you can narrow it down, in addition to what you already mentioned, I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I think one thing you can think about, and this could be a standard, right? You don't have to tailor it for any job, but think about what's your personal narrative in 1 minute. Like, what do you want people to capture about you? So who are you? Where did you come from? What are your values? Like, I go back to values a lot because, again, I really think, at least in my industry, we're moving into this value-based mentality. But I think bringing that into your narrative is important, right? And I think you want to be authentic in an interview. So think about, what is your 1 minute narrative? Like, what's your elevator pitch about yourself? And then if you want to think about how to build that narrative, is think about who you are, where you came from, and what are your values. And that's your elevator pitch right there.
I agree. So you would also highly suggest to like write all of this down.
Yes, write it
beforehand.
Because, I mean, I always think about, like, if I was trapped in an elevator with like someone who, you know, someone famous, or like someone at my company that I would never get time with, like, what is my quick elevator pitch to them about who I am, right? So like, repeat that, like memorize that, because that stays with you, and actually it becomes your compass as well.
It really does. It sounds like, okay, like, write down what you think your 1 minute pitch is. Probably share it with someone to get some feedback. Get some feedback on it. I think one of the biggest learnings when I was first, I would say like maybe 20, 21, 22, when I was like interviewing, the biggest, even I think in high school, feedback that I got was like, and you mentioned this earlier, share your like practice with people. What you think, these like the answers you're going through in your head, when you say them out loud, might not sound so great. Or maybe like the flow isn't there, or maybe the example that you're thinking about didn't work, or like it's a part of it's storytelling, right? So you want to make sure there's like a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Right.
So, like making sure that is all outlined and put together too. That's really helpful. Yeah, I feel like a lot of what we're talking about is like prepared.
It's kind of making me want to go and interview someone.
So the next question, so going into with the previous one, we're going into the interview itself. What are questions candidates should be asking during the interview. So we talk a lot about the interview, you being assessed for the role, but you're also assessing the company and figuring out if this is the manager you want to work for, this is the team you want to work for, this is the company you want to work for. So what should the candidates be asking?
Yeah, so I think one good question to ask always is around, what does success look like for you? Right? So really getting a sense of how do they measure success for their employees. I think that's really important because it allows you to also think like, okay, are these the goals I want to drive towards?
Yeah.
I think, another question I usually like to hear when I'm interviewing is around like, what are the opportunities that the team have, right? So you can figure out, oh, okay, now they said the opportunity is this. How can I come in and say, oh, let me help you build on that opportunity, right? So like the opportunity, the challenges or the gaps that you currently have with your team. And then you're going to have to quickly think on your feet and say, okay, what do I have to bring to the table that can help void those? And then thinking about, I always like to ask people as well around, where do you see this team going a year from now, 2 years from now? Because that also gives you a sense of your own career growth among that team. So those are the top 3 questions that I would definitely suggest people ask in interviews.
What you mentioned earlier about assessing companies' culture. There's like different social channels. Are there, in addition to the ones that you mentioned, what would be questions that you can ask in an interview to assess if this is the type of culture you want to work for?
I think one question you can always ask someone is, what keeps you at the company? Like, why are you still here? And you can also say, I've read up about the culture. How does the culture play out on your team? How do you live the culture every day? Because those are going to tell you, like, okay, is the culture a bluff? Or is there actuality into what they're saying?
That's so true. Because it's easy to say that our culture is like X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
It's amazing, and we all love it.
But how do you actually practice it?
Yeah.
Right?
No,
you actually live by those.
Yeah,
that's values.
No, that's a really great question. And then the other question that we have is, what red flags should candidates pay attention to during interviews? So how do you make sure, and I guess this goes back to the culture question that I just asked, how do you make sure this is a company, this is a manager you want to work for?
So for me personally, in my point of view, is if I go into an interview and someone is on their laptop or on their phone, that's a red flag to me right away. Because I'm like, you're not engaging with me. You're not paying attention to me. Like, this is our first meeting. And if you're not giving me your full attention, how do I know you're going to do that in the future? So that's like the biggest red flag for me. The other red flag is if they're not able to articulate the culture, that's also a red flag. Because if I'm going into something because of the culture, I'm going to be like, okay, this is odd. The other thing is, I think around growth. If they're not able to articulate growth for the team, themselves, the company, that's a bit of a red flag for me. Because it also makes me wonder around the commitment of this individual. And if I'm going to be working for them, it's kind of like, ooh, are you here for the long run, or are you here for the short term?
Yeah. No, that's so true. And I know sometimes I wonder how, I guess it's a risky position, but when people are applying for startups, it's like a small team of like 5 or 6 people.
Yeah.
You're trying to assess like, what does growth look like for for your team here?
Yeah. I think if you're looking at a startup, one thing you also want to pay particular attention to is, I would recommend always asking, like, how does the CEO engage with the people? Does not even just the CEO, I would say like management. Are they aspiring managers? Do they influence? Are they motivational? Because one tricky thing about going into a startup, or any company for that matter, I think you can ask these questions is, are you going in to truly just work
Mm-hmm.
without like recognition and excitement and motivation? That's a hard place to go into, because then it's
Oh yeah. No,
it's
that's
a
true.
grind. It's that's not fun.
No, it's not. I guess some people can do it. I can't.
No, I can't either. So I guess I think then another question that I would make sure people ask is, how do your leaders inspire?
Oh yeah, 100%.
That's for me personally, that's super important.
Yeah. You know, another question I just thought about, and I wonder what would be your thoughts of how to assess it, is I've heard people's experiences going from like a small company to a big company and vice versa. And when you're in a smaller company, feeling like you have more impact.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can see how the things that you're working on is impacting the rest of the company versus when you're at like a 50,000, you know, people company.
Yeah.
You're like a very, very small piece of the puzzle. It's still an important piece. You're needed, but you may not still feel that impact. What would be like your recommendations from a candidate's perspective when, and then you have the middle companies, obviously, where most of them fall. But what are the ways that a candidate could be assessing that throughout the interview process to figure out, one, you should probably know yourself, like what gives you most joy and fulfillment, like what's your position you should be in. Yeah. But how then do you kind of assess, like, this is what brings me joy and fulfillment. This is what the type of impact I want to have at a company. Yeah. And does this company align with that?
Right. I mean, I think it's simply asking, right? I think you need to, taking a step back, yes, you have to figure out first what kind of impact do you want and what kind of environment you want to be in. Do you want to be in that environment where you're kind of in the know of everything? Or do you want to be in the environment where it's kind of like, you know, you're doing good work and then it kind of gets moved on. Yeah. So I think the most important question to ask, you know, for those companies, big or small, is around, how is impact recognized here? Like if I'm working on a big program, do I get to pitch the idea or are you going to pitch the idea? Right? Like who gets to kind of run the different elements of the process, the program, the project, whatever it may be. And then, you know, again, going back to how are also people recognized in this company? Yeah. How do you do recognition? Right? Is it just simply like a good job manager to employee? Is it team-wide, org-wide? What does that look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's so true. That was a really good response.
On the spot. I'm like, hold on, let me quickly process this.
Nice. So next question what are common interview mistakes? And how can they be avoided? And we briefly addressed this throughout the call, but if there's any like top of mind that you can think of that we haven't talked about.
Oh my gosh, I think one of the most commons is being late. I know I talked about this earlier, but like, don't be late. A mistake, I would say, like, you forgot to print your resume. It happens, but don't forget that. Like, be over prepared and just be ready. And they, you know, most people come in with the printed interview, but it's good to say, oh, I see you had a printed interview. I had one printed for you too, right? Like it just shows that you came ready. And yeah, I would say prepared and being late. I think those are the two most common ones. And the ones that actually are detrimental.
No, I think so too. I used to get to interviews like an hour early.
And I would just wait in my car. Like,
it's like, at least I'm here. You know, we both live in the Bay Area and traffic here is horrendous. So it's like, you always know that will always be a chance that traffic is going to be really bad, or there's going to be an accident, or something's, or if you're taking BART or Caltrain, there's some type of delay that's happening. You can never be too early. If you're really, really early, you don't have a car, you can go to a car. Yeah, go to a car. I've done that before. Go to a car.
And go get prepared. Go to the coffee.
No, I agree 100%. I don't think I've ever. I don't think when we were interviewing last year that I had anyone come in that was late.
Yeah.
But we've had issues, like you mentioned before, of like a phone interview or a video call, like service being an issue, or you can't hear them, or the wrong number was provided, or something.
Yeah.
Like the small stuff.
And I think another common interview mistake. Oh my gosh, and it just slipped my mind. It will come back to me.
Okay, we'll come back to it.
Yeah, it will come back.
Let's see. And then, so we talked about this earlier. So what's the best way to follow up after an interview? We talked about sending like some type of follow-up email. Is that like standard? If it's a follow-up email, like fine.
Yeah. I feel like always follow up with an email. You probably won't get a response. Don't take that as, oh, they didn't like me. It's just they heard you. They're moving on with their day, right? So always do that. If you don't have the email addresses, send it to the recruiter and have the recruiter pass it on, because they will. Or even just simply ask the recruiters, hey, can you provide me the email address? They might say, just send me the email. That's it. That's good. Don't expect a response, and don't see that as a negative.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I don't think I ever like respond to many of them. I do just to some of them.
Sometimes I'm like, oh, I saw it. Thank you. And then I move on. Like, half the time I'm like, oh, I saw it.
Yeah. But you'll remember it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's super impactful.
No, I agree. And then
I just remembered
go ahead.
My mistake. So one thing, just be mindful of, like, sometimes interviews, there might be like a dead silent, right? Like the interviewer maybe ran out of a question, whatever it may be. But just be prepared for those moments that you can insert yourself and ask the question, because it shows proactivity. Like you're being proactive in the conversation and you're not letting the conversation die. It shows a level of interest as well. So it's not necessarily a mistake, but more of, I guess, tips or advice to think about, be prepared for.
No, I agree. I just thought of another. We only have like 6 minutes left.
Okay.
So we don't have time.
This went by fast.
I know. There is so much to talk about. But the other thing that just came to me, and I should have added a question about this, is the way you answer questions. And I know this can be a whole hour in itself, but how to properly address interview questions. But one of my pet peeves, and we talked about this earlier, is when someone answers a question but doesn't necessarily showcase how they fixed the situation or how they grew from it or what was a result from it or whatnot. It's almost like there's like an equation to this, like the parts that you're supposed to hit when you answer questions. What would be your tips or advice to make sure that you're properly answering the question?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing you can always do is look at most common interview questions, right? Like, and just prepare yourself as you're going into that conversation. You don't know what the person asking you is going to say or what they're going to respond, but at least you're prepared. So practice, right? Practice mock interviews with your friends, with your parents, whoever it may be. Like, just do it, because then you get more comfortable with answering and showcasing your overall answer, and it becomes your story almost. You can always also ask recruiters, like, what are the most common questions this interview panel will ask me, right? I think that's a great thing to ask a recruiter, and then they'll spin up some questions for you. But be prepared with what your answers are going to be, so that you're answering the question, you're bringing a solution, and you come full rounded with your answer.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. Because you don't really know what questions are going to be asked. You can do research and you can figure it out and you can be prepared. But I definitely think the practicing and saying it out loud will at least get you comfortable to different ways that you can answer a question and whatnot. But it always gets to me when people answer questions. I don't know, interested to get your thoughts when there is some type of, the question is centered around like conflict management. It's like, what was it, the conflict you were in, and whatever, like, how did you overcome it, or what happened next? And it's like, I had this conflict, and it was so and so's fault.
Yeah,
and it was always so and so's fault.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to do that.
And eventually they realized it was their fault.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, so where was your accountability in all of this? Like, yeah, you want to make sure you're not throwing people under the bus, even though they don't know the people, because that just shows, okay, is this behavior gonna be replicated in our organization? Like, again, go back to being vulnerable, bringing some humility into answering your questions. Like, it's okay. You're human. It's fine. It's a good sign. It's a strength, actually, not a weakness.
I think so too. And I think sometimes people go into interviews so focused on aligning their skills for the position.
Yeah.
And it's like, people are also assessing your soft skills.
Oh, yeah.
Are you how is your communication skills?
Are you a team player?
Are you a team player? Yeah. So it's like, you can have you can be the best coder in the world.
Yeah.
But if,
you can't engage with your team and bring them along and take accountability, like, what's the point?
Yeah, because the whole time, I think, even for me, as like, I'm assessing candidates, I'm like, okay, if I brought that into this team, that like outlook on this, like, that wouldn't work out.
Yeah.
No, I definitely agree. We have like 2 minutes left.
Okay.
So are there any final tips or advice you want to share that we haven't covered so far?
Oh my gosh, I feel like we covered so much. Don't be nervous. Enjoy your interview. Honestly, enjoy your interview, because that, go into it like a conversation. And the more you can do that, the more confident you appear. You're not going to stumble around your words. You're going to feel prepared, because you're probably going in super prepared. But just be comfortable. Just always know that the person you're speaking with was in your shoes one day too. So they know exactly how that feeling is. Even if it's a leader of the organization, VP, whatever you want to think about it, they're a person. Like, outside of those 4 walls, they live a life similar to you. So always remember that, because it makes the whole interview more relaxing.
I think so too. 100%. The best interviews are those that are more a conversation.
Yeah.
100%. Oh, I wish I had an hour with you. There's like so much more to cover. I literally added I printed out the questions, and I added one more and was like, how do you respond to rejection? But I was like, we could maybe address that in another call.
I mean, really quickly, you respond, thank you. Please keep me in mind for the future.
Oh, should you always respond when?
I think you should.
Yeah.
I think, again, it comes back to etiquette. And if you still want to be a part of that pipeline, you can always respond and say, thanks for letting me know any feedback you have for me. In order for me to be prepared for the next time around. Maybe ask, can we keep in touch? Like, things like that still shows you're engaged, and you're not just saying, okay, cool, I'm rejected, let's walk away.
Yeah.
I think it's
I agree. Especially, you were saying earlier how, like, you never know if another opportunity comes up.
Right. You just don't know.
Yeah. No, I know so many people who applied for a position at a company. That one didn't work out, but then a few months later, or like a year later, something else came up, and they thought about them, and they reached out to them. So I agree. Well, we are at the end of our hour. I'm so sad, but thank you for the great call. Yeah, no, of course. Yeah. So what we're going to do, because I don't know if you noticed, I was taking notes on my little notepad too as we were talking, but we are probably going to create like a 1-page PDF document that we can share with people based off of the things that we talked about today, and if we think there's something missing that we can add, that we can share with people. But thank you again, Sahajan.
Thank you. Awesome. Thanks for having me.
No, of course. I feel like we're like just scratching the surface. There's like so much more to discuss.
Well, there can always be part 2.
That's true. There can always be part 2. But yeah, and thanks for everyone else for joining the call. We'll share the video afterwards too, so you guys can all take a look at it afterwards. But thanks everyone. We'll see you guys later.
Thanks. Bye.